Okay. How's the voice? Okay, the voice is nice. All right, let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. It may be a long one, a long ride, pilot ride this episode, but feel free to tune in and tune out at any moment. Abidance by the nature of experience surpasses any sort of artificial honor. So, to begin the talk, the title is An Explanation for Internally Observable Subjective Designs. I want to approach. Sorry, guys, just a second. Okay. I wanted to approach tonight's episode as one where the human being has to, in some sense, consider where the human being is. It is one thing to become acquainted to certain subjective designs and then assume the world is still that. I have realized that the moment changes, and in every moment of change, there is a new experience of a new environment or space. I've had moments where I have kind of considered the objective realm in some sense to be a dimension with a certain speed and movement of change, and the subjective realm a dimension with a certain movement and speed of change. And what does that mean? It means it's two dimensions that are not in sync. So I want you to imagine playing two songs, but they're not in sync. Imagine like playing the same song and then playing another song, or that same song from like 30 seconds after the song's played. What I mean by that is that the inner life and the outer life, even though one finds them in the presence of one moment of attention, they move differently. The body changes slower than the bodies of thoughts that the attention embodies. I guess a good starting point is an image. So to give you an image that will kind of be the home run for the talk is that I want you to acknowledge that your imagination is not empty. It is observable. It's a design that is observable, but it is in a subjective room that is only in the projected sphere of your attention. What that means is a human being has an inner dimension and an outer dimension. Interestingly, just like how the brain has two hemispheres, and one hemisphere we give it to the side, to the blue lightsaber, to the creative aspect and component of reality, and the other side of the brain, the left side, is given to more like the processing and kind of analysis part of the brain. of one's intelligence. So what that means is it's as if you have two hemispheres being the same brain with a lot of frontal lobe activity. Two dimensions that are only two because there is an awareness to the whole thing. It's as if you need a full cake before you can turn it into pieces. And so man has in some sense made the world into pieces of language, symbolism, sound. Now these pieces of language, they all come from one view. And so what that means is you can say it's like one grand artwork that was torn to pieces, and all the pieces, or you can say one giant mirror that shattered into various pieces, and each piece reflects is still the mirror, you know. I found myself drawn to what I found the status quo avoiding, and that was to attempt an explanation for man's inner reality, man's thoughts of himself. Like, where are your thoughts living right now? If we wanted to answer that question, to find the source or the roots of thought, Mr. Within is saying that those roots go into a soil that is inconceivable. So imagine language is a sort of soil in which in this soil there are various trees that are held, various ideologies. So as you look at the known components, as you study the content of your conscious mind, then you begin to realize that at some point the design of the cosmos extends into what it's a state where it's too dark to see, or another way of saying it, it's too non-dual to dualistically conceive in language. Those moments where man goes beyond the language threshold, it requires not only an incredible ability from the human being, it requires an incredible ability to not just confront the external world change, but the inner world. Many people, externality changing for them is easier than their internal reality changing. The most profoundest realization, I consider this one of the grand realizations I attained, like I in some sense could gaze through in this life. And it was the realization that nobody knows. That's it. I was trying to think like what metaphor should I use to explain it, but that sentence says it. When you feel a sort of cosmic solitude, not loneliness. Loneliness occurs. Loneliness is like absence. Do you know? It's as if like there was something, now there isn't. But there are moments in life where the person is simply content. I'll give you an example. Like the person has never played a sport. The person plays the sport. They get such an experience from it that they keep wanting to play the sport. In playing the sport, they realize they cannot be others, and they cannot try to copy others. That's something beautiful about life, where it's like, just like the classrooms, it's as if no cheating is allowed. So souls can't cheat in this game of life. Now, when I say no cheating allowed, that's another way of saying Just because your subjective realm can see the finish line doesn't mean your objective realm is headed that way. I find that we as a species, now we got to take things into light. For a second, I don't know how. I think I was too much of a fool. It's like sometimes the fool of this world is the genius of another. And sometimes the genius of this world is the fool of another, you know? But the idea is that if we were as human beings, like literally, you forgot every philosophy, ideology. So, like, you guys have to understand when I speak, the reason I find myself kind of able to communicate is because there's an inner authorization internally. There's a sort of view that the nature doesn't disharmonize. I don't know how to say it, but life is not just an instruction booklet. You know, life is not just a series of language and that's it. Life isn't, can't be put in a box. In other words, it means there is so much change that the fact that something doesn't change is weird. Like immortality would be weird. You know? It's as if like all the gods looked at the man who became immortal and they're like, Jesus Christ, what are kids doing nowadays? You know? Honestly, you have to think about all of causality. I find this is the difference between even in animals, you see in animal psychology, the alpha perspective and the beta perspective. The beta perspective is everything is, by the way, like identity is self-claimed. That means the person sees a self and it's like, all right, this is me. This is what I identify with. In Japan, there's a saying, they say the man is the room he's in. What does that mean? That means in every room, you are aware of the room. 8 billion creatures on a rock in a space. Forget language for a second, just entertain what I'm saying. And for a second, just think, okay, 8 billion creatures on a planet. Realistically, what does progress look like? Where the obvious thing is that I find we're a species that its mind is sprouting. And the mind has been sprouting because the same kind of advanced acceleration we see in the technological industry, you know, it's like exponential. It's like technology is accelerating to the power of 10, you know, in a certain scale. And at the same time, I find that we went through, language also evolved. But language was interweaved with direct experience. So what does that mean? That means the moment is a subjective vehicle for a witnessing attention that at most is so instantaneously here that it can't be, there's no storyline. Do you know, it's like when you realize the storyline is a series of dots, when you realize life seems to be a sequencing of moments of experience, it's like sometimes how can you see karma when you don't see all of it? How can you, the thing is, man is claiming a mask as his own face, not realizing this mask is not his face. And that mask is language for the human species. So I'm noticing something weird. I still feel we as a species are still super primitive, right? Even though we speak and we have minds, but that mind is something that's activated in a field. Do you know? What does that mean? It's like you get to the restaurant and then you know, sit in and kind of dine. But it's like before you're at the restaurant, you're like, there's nowhere to dine. You know, the reality is not accessible. So it's like a bunch of, the thing is, human beings, of course, like this is a strategic thing. I in my mind, playfully when I speak, there's of course, like I have a sort of historic acknowledgement. All right, certain things happen that there's certain things that I have to honor, even if it has nothing to do with my ideology with my experiences, simply because the effort of expression and design in this cosmos is rare. I find that what occurred is just like how the objective evolution was based on a creature growing limbs and moving separately on the surface of the earth. The subjective evolution is when the creature replicated the same pattern but began to realize it is separate from its body as a thought or as a point of attention. So what does that mean? That means the subjective evolution was the first time a collective field of intelligence could take an individual breath. I found life to be an excuse for an unknown that in some angles certain philosophical minds say will forever be unknown. Some people say, no, it won't be forever unknown, but we will die before we can answer the question. Some people say the question is not attainable. You know, some people says there's no question, don't ask the question. The secular society looks at that poor new age kind of happy person, that kind of guy hugging trees and being like, look at this, you know, like a non-working soul, you know. But we have to realize life is not just built in intensity. No great tool is, no invention is built in one state of mind. No civilization is just built with one image. What it is it becomes, it's just, we just have to organize, we have to build bridges now between our inner realms, but through a global archetype. And I thought, what's the fastest way to kind of evolve civilization? And it's to treat civilization as a person, which is a very like kind of bold idea, because what I'm saying is we have to, as a species, begin bringing all the philosophers from the globe, you know, and finding out how human civilization and consciousness is going to treat itself as a collective phenomenon. Right? You can say, sure, holding hands, singing songs at world peace, like, yeah, that's one way of unity, you know. But there are many ways, because we are having, in some sense, at some point, we haven't reached it there. So right now, any person who's alive, listening, enjoy the nature of the world. You might not believe it, but in maybe like couple hundred years, realities, the creatures that we will be, our attention will be valuing things more multidimensionally. That means less here. So what does that mean? That means right now people are wondering, hey, is life a dream? But in the future generations, and I've had moments where it's strange, but I call them, like, some you can call them prayer, but I've had certain moments where I've just looked at the sky and just thrown a thought in time. That means I saw, like, I got a glimpse of, in 2400, children will not only, if, these are all potentials, right? So if, yeah, I saw a sort of glimpse that poor children, they not only have to deal with life's unknown, but they have to wonder if life is a technological simulation or not. You see, man is a biological animal, right? So we have contentment with what we open our eyes in normally, right? What the design that you move as is, you can say, part of your reality. This becomes the next level concept of kinda acknowledging consciousness as this sphere that's glowing. And so imagine, from the center of the sphere, there's a 360 kind of spherical camera view, right? Somehow imagine. We don't have cameras like that, but I'm saying, like, imagine there was a 360 view, right? It may be unfathomable to us, but I want to give you this idea that rather than, Carl Jung even understood this, but people weren't ready to hear it, I think. Rather than the system, oh, sorry guys, just a second. The idea is Carl Jung mapped the unknown. He, in some sense, suggested the kind of the presence of the ego. You can say the conscious mind. And then there was the personal unconscious, which was, in some sense, you can say the subconscious. And there was the collective unconscious. And Carl Jung kind of came and said, this is how the room of emptiness behind our eyes look, kind of can be like, right? So the thing is that if you imagine, let me say it like this, imagine a crystal orb and imagine many colored cloths just placed on the ground, and this crystal orb is being pushed and it's rolling over these different colored cloths. That means when the glass orb goes over like an orange cloth, it takes the color orange. When it goes to the green cloth, it takes the color green, you know. So what it means is that rather than us feeling that we can really build models for the unknown, maps to the unknown, the question becomes about conscious navigation. So the thing is, Carl Jung wanted to find a blueprint. Mr. Within is saying it's something that you have to pilot. Piloting doesn't mean it's enough to just know what's going on. You have to navigate. So the importance. Think of it this way: you are this supreme attention. Now, this supreme attention has thrown parts of itself into various phenomena, and this has become, in some sense, a city of definition behind the eyes of the being. Carl Jung was a great mind, and he did the most correct thing. Sometimes the wisdom of advanced philosophers are those. Lao Tzu has this quote where he says, once the leader's task is done, the people would say we did it ourselves. Why? Why would he say that? Because the most incredible effort is not to bring attention to self. It is to see that that self is a mirror for attention. I call it a moment in life where you meet the mirror of existence. You find the mirror of existence. You suddenly, the free will realizes what it has responsibly projected. And the thing is, I found the reason a lot of, I don't know why, but I guess it was meant to in some sense, that in the Abrahamic traditions, man fell. There's the story as if we were up there in a good state and we fell. It's as if like the soul became sick and it in some sense became embodied, you know? The children of Adam and Eve continued. And so it's not just one tradition. Many traditions around the world, the prophetic figures came and said those after would be worse. Those after would be worse. They would be, and it's not that they would be worse. They would be more led astray. They would be more led astray. And I realized some things were feared, but it's not in the hand of man. That means there's this freedom where the person feels they don't have freedom and they want it, right? Like the in a small room and they're like, gosh, why am I in this small room? And they're trying to work hard to get out of this small room. Because we fell, we feel we are mistakenly existing in the world. And the Abrahamic religions had to respond to the savageness of 6th century psychology by trying to take people's attention out of their personal caves. So you see, it's as if like the martial artists were like, they were like, I am so happy Shaolin monks exist. It's like, that's definitely something to be grateful for. The archetype of the balanced warrior. It's not just about performance to self and others. Most people don't realize it, but they're performing in front of themselves and totally ignorant of external reality. An example of this is like I've been in many kind of like public situations where miscommunication, rather than there being patience for people to recommunicate again, emotions have interpreted the person's communication. Do you know? So what that means is, believe it or not, because nobody has your eyes, really, what are they commenting on? You know? And because you don't have people's eyes, what can you comment on? And eventually it would be sharing the patterns that are real to one moment, and that becomes a contribution in a database. I'm kind of seeing that the whole civilization maybe is going to go on this kind of next level communicating buzz, where it's like right now we are reacting. It's kind of like you can say soon we can have a celebration as a species that have totally, the mind has also stepped out of the food chain. There came a time where I suddenly laughed and I realized I have allowed every thought that has bothered me and brought me joy to enter my space. It's like so there came a moment where I realized, because one wants, they project. But if they just watch, simply watch. It's as if like this is a secret power every human being has. It's called, you can be very simple. We're not like Superman. We can't fly into the air, but we can just be very simple. We can entertain simple interpretations of the moment and complex interpretations of the moment. And there's, I would say this as that complex interpretations, they're eventually, it's based on how far you go. On some level, we are tunneling through many experiences, and in many of those experiences with emotional registrations to certain design. So what that means is, like, imagine the person fell from a bike and they were like, oh God, like, I'll give you an example, right? So, long story short, when I was like very young, not like too young, I think I was like 9, and we were living in an apartment in Vancouver, and my mother and brother, I have a twin brother, same age, and my mother and brother were on this swing in the balcony of our house apartment in Vancouver, and for some reason, from my perspective, this is what I feel what happened, where I just so instantly go, like, how can I tell you? It's like my dad rings the doorbell, and I just so quickly run that I shatter through a glass that was like so clean. I don't know, like that was like divinely clean glass that I couldn't notice it. So I eventually get like my knee, and like just strangely just my knee gets cut a little bit, you know. And what happens is, like, years later on, that scar that was left on my knee, it's as if like I saw it, and it's as if the image of that experience was still like the light of that experience was still lit, right? So we have to realize, like, the mind, it's like we have to say it's non-local to the secular society, but we have to say it's multi-local to, in some sense, just the primary singular religious oriented mind. You know, that means, think of it this way, that it's not just people that are fighting with each other, it's also ideas. And so think of it this way, that it's like one kingdom just purely believes that it's objective. One kingdom believes that it's purely just linguistic and subjective. And some people believe that it's neither, right? And so there's various states of mind in the same space. First thing is, there should be an incredible warning given to all human beings, that realize that you are not in a stable system, that the system is not all knowing. That when I say the system, I'm talking about civilization. I'm trying to say that man was not a perfect, uh, it's like we are not perfect, but we're also not imperfect, you know? I found it fascinating that any image from the past that the person holds on to, it occupies the space of their attention from what else it can hold. That means it's kind of like in economics too, the concept of an opportunity cost, but the realization that what is the value of every moment? Like it's as if the person is writing and he's like, okay, could I be drawing instead? Could I be doing something else instead? Right? So that it's like based on the ability of the mind's projection of what it can do, the opportunity cost becomes greater. You have to learn to honor evolutionary life. And we have to learn this to such a deep degree that we got to learn it as a species. And I think what's happening is that we are reaching a sort of threshold in civilization where people must go to silence to reset the application of their mind. And believe it or not, what happens when a person sleeps? Nature is so magnificent that by just making man's consciousness cyclical, it makes him want to live for the next day. If you were an eternal being, there'd be nothing really to live for. You're alive always. There is no inspiration. Sometimes I thought, okay, imagine if I was in heaven. Wait a minute. It's like, what would I do there? Everything's there. It's like, so it's like an inventor who wants to invent something, but then realizing why should he already go into a time machine and see what he invents? Why should he not take the journey himself? I find that human beings are, the mind is a world generator. And from that world arises a self, and from that self arises a subjective, arises another world. And then arises another self, and this constant shift of attention between the concept and focus, the center of the universe, and then suddenly the edges of the sky, like it becomes a dance between the limited and the limitless. It becomes a sort of realizing infinity and the finite are two sides of the same coin. So it's like, how can you know you're a temporary being if there is no eternal reference point? Do you see how can we, it's like, it's as if we were right now in the brain of the cosmos, how can we say that the cosmos may forget? Some people have this view that any design, whether objective or subjective, the moment it is thought of, it has manifest value. That means, imagine like, you thinking about a sunny day, and then that thought, in some sense, regardless if it rains tomorrow, forever exists in its own, in the instant of its design that was manifest. Ultimately, it's going to be very intense, but the explanation of life is going to become simple movement. And then we're going to wonder what is beyond complex movement, and we're going to realize it's silence. The cycle repeats, just like the seasons. The human being goes through a state of kind of opening up to a psychological structure, changing through a psychological structure, and then witnessing the end of a psychological structure, then witnessing as the void, then returning from the void, and it's like a change of seasons, for the soul. And the soul is not like a lost kid in a mall that needs to be saved. Okay, it's like we design. The only mysterious part is like right now as I'm speaking, I can imagine, like right now in front of me, I see a cup. Okay, a glass of orange juice. Now this glass of orange juice is almost empty, but in my mind, I could envision right beside it the same glass with a full cup of orange juice. But that glass doesn't exist. It doesn't appear, but I have access to the subjective design. So the point of this talk is trying to explain why there is that awareness to subjective design that is really in the personal dimension of the being. I have found myself in this life to navigate in unconscious loops, in conscious loops, and in some sense, a sort of, it's kind of strange, but you know how some people, for example, they look at there are certain people who they feel like they see colors around people. Now, me personally, I feel like color has to do with the eye. So if the mind had a sort of if there was a sort of extra sight, that extra sight would have nothing to do with color, you know. So because then it would be like reality. It's like how can you explain to the legs of the chair and the back of the chair that they're the same chair? It's like how? They are different parts as long as they're separate. As long as a creature is separate to himself, it doesn't matter how much company he finds himself. There is a sort of loneliness that comes from the hollowness of one's future self. And really, that's where a lot of the unknown, at least for Western society, comes. It is in the failure or the mistakes that we learn from. You see, I noticed this story. Think of it this way. First stage, become aware that you're a creature of thought first. First acknowledge that there are thoughts, that you exist after 4 billion years to be a creature that can look at something, and then a subjective design can arise from by you simply glancing at something, you know? It's like, what is that idea of love at first sight, you know? I think Heraclitus can explain that, you know? Love at first sight is the person sees something that they are drawn to, you know. So the person, let's say you see someone and you suddenly the person doesn't actually love that person. They don't know who that person is, but in that instant they love how their moment was when they saw that person. And so Heraclitus, when he says no man steps in the same river twice, it's not the same man, it's not the same river. Guess what? Love can only happen at first sight if every moment is a new moment. There is an inner life to be studied, to be wondered about, to be shared. There's 8 billion people who are hiding their inner lives because the world is too machine-like, because the world doesn't know what to react to. I find that we should assume that that insanity is due to a response to the void universal structure. That means that the reason society, it's like regardless of how rational we build it, it's as if it's all held in an unknown irrationality. So this is why it's as if in some sense, why wasn't the best way seen at first? Because unless the first step was made, the second steps and the accumulation of the rest couldn't be made. The mind is a communicating phenomena. I say that the being is an advanced communicator. That means everybody, human beings, let's say human minds, I acknowledge them as either pilots or advanced communicators. Advanced communicators are beings who their language is still required to be. They are not piloting. An advanced communicator is someone who realizes they're the advanced communication of the universal sector up to this point. It's as if I'm not just a child of my parents. I'm a child of the cosmos. I am a form in the vastness of a form, you know. It's very fascinating. Life, the mind has an ability to touch infinity, but because it cannot truly see beyond, if it cannot copy paste objective designs in the void, then subjectivity is on thin ice, and the person suddenly may feel that life cannot have a meaning prior to any action. If you were a yogi, some people would say that's samadhi, buddy. But if you're someone who has a part to play in civilization, which is pretty much every person, there are moments in life where you cannot doubt. There is no time to do anything about. They must just be trusted, and it just one must go forth. It's as if Dylan Thomas had this quote where he said, "Don't go gentle into that good night, rage against the dying of the light." So I am realizing that's the whole game of the civilization. Dylan Thomas wasn't just saying that to his father. He was saying that to every being that is putting an effort to continue. Now, in all our efforts, Mr. Within is noticing kind of like every person's efforts are driving simply from mainly from their personal reality. The more power the ego gets, the less it needs power. Do you know? So the less it cares about other realities. So if you're a person you can say that the human being is actually obsessed with himself, and if he's not obsessed with the self, in some sense, then the person can't survive. It's as if, think of it this way, your stomach is giving you orders to go eat. Your body in every instant is giving you a sort of feedback of what is happening to it, you know? Civilization is a masquerade party. It is a simulation. But it is a simulation that is necessary. That means we have to keep, just like the yin-yang symbol, we can't have a pure utopia. We have to keep a bit of the chaos here to maintain balance, to maintain that new factor. Anyways, guys, if anybody has any comments on the subjective realm, feel free to share it in the chat section. The explanation that I'm trying to give is that we were the unconscious movement of nature at some point became conscious that we were moving separate to the surface of the earth. From that consciousness arose an awareness of a long, vast evolutionary repetition. So the engines were just starting, right? The gears were just starting to move, and eventually the gears moved to a more sophisticated point where it suddenly became aware. So it's as if life is following one pattern, and that is create and then change in accordance to what you do. So it's as if you can say the free will is like this, literally out of nowhere. The person is given a jersey and they're thrown into like a soccer game at the most intense point of the soccer game. And so they have to just engage. They have to kind of like go along with the system to, in some sense, continue in it. The thing is that I always thought that if Earth, human beings became an advanced civilization, and they went to imagine like another planet that wasn't as evolved, like we looked at that planet and saw the inner child of the species, like how we were. And so I always thought that how would we as an advanced civilization communicate to less advanced civilizations? And I realized we won't communicate until the elephant in the room is acknowledged. I feel that it's not that we are alone in this cosmos, it's that we are at the center of this gathering. We are like, you know how like, I remember like in Iran in my youth, like when I was really young, like my grandmother had this very large kind of space, and that was kind of like chairs all around, and so she would invite everybody and everybody would sit in the kind of chairs. What I'm trying to say is there was an audience, and the children would play in the middle of the stage so everybody could see the children playing, you know? I find that where it's like Fermi's paradox, where is everybody? Where are the aliens? A kind of philosophical inquiry. I find that the aliens are just wondering if we notice them. And I find that the extraterrestrial man is going to make contact with is not an individual being. It's a collective realization. It's as if a mirror that was broken again, that mirror, imagine the pieces now returning slowly with a mysterious gravitational pull, as if this part of the universal sector is now choosing to roar in this way. You know, that means I've worked on a lot of kind of abstract kind of mystical ideas, and there's this thing that I'm probably going to give talks on it later, but it's the roar of galaxies. It is the roar of the cosmos. It is how all phenomenology is one intense expression, you know? And like in that one intense expression, there is meaning, life, eternity, da 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 da. So many colors. You can say the ideologies eventually become greater. They become like colors of the mind. So you look at the color spectrum. You acknowledge those colors, and they're like, okay, these are individually their own colors and their own categories. So now you suddenly see, guess what? What else is categorized? The whole philosophical landscape. So pretty much I feel that people are being sculpted by the data they process as beings. And the data they process at first is the voice of their environment. Now people are getting the impression that they're independent, free beings, not realizing that you can't exist in an environment without the environment becoming a part of you. Just like in human relationships, that person you're sticking, you're living with, for example, getting married to, that is a person who you have to feel. If their mind was a garden, you could walk in that garden, and they too as well. So a sort of kind of environment. It's as if you accept that environment, as if every person's mind is some sort of expression. So in some sense, that any human being, I'm trying to say that everything influences the attention to everything. And so life cannot be taken as a simulation, because then we reach a dead end. It can't be taken as a truth, then we reach a dead end. It can't be taken, and eventually I realize, oh my God, it's like, look at how many stories the mind can generate, and we're kind of generating. I mean, like, look at the words in the dictionary. Guess what? Those words didn't come from the stars. Those those words were, people chose that symbol to relate to that idea, to that experience. Imagine, I find it was such a divine moment for Newton when he realized gravity. It must have been. Imagine he suddenly notices that everything everybody is holding in their hand falls to the ground rather than floating in the air. Imagine suddenly Newton just looking and being like, oh my God, why have we as a species not acknowledged that things are being pulled down? And believe it or not, there are certain ideas that suggest the fact that there's gravity influences the psychology of the person of feeling suffering. That means a lot of times suffering is because you got to just lie down on the ground. I'm telling you, the easiest way to get rid of, like, this is an emergency kind of first aid kit for anger and like intense states of mind, is just lie down on the ground with your back on the ground. You'll notice somebody who's lied down with his back on the ground can't get angry. I'm not joking, you know? The person doesn't feel like getting up. The person doesn't. Not that, like, you know what I mean? I'm just saying that the state of mind is important. How you hold your body in every moment is a state of mind. You can say it's not just like the yogi had to just do yogic move, do kind of hatha yoga and various physical practices only. It was also the diet. It was also the perspective on life. So it was, you know, the philosophical diet of the person, you know. Greatness is defined by those who meet the unknown. There is so much in this life, just like how Newton suddenly realized gravity. Do you know how many hidden ways things are working that we just haven't looked at? We are as a species. That means, in some sense, imagine all the eyes of 8 billion human beings were connected. That would either mean the individual consciousness is like a drop in an ocean, so it would mean that the being is experiencing everything. So the moment you experience yourself as a field of intelligence, all content of the mind, objective and subjective, are all seen as projections in the moment. So how do we see that? You know, how is it that imagination is like this private room of our own thinking that we're in? And the explanation is because change is in the driver's seat, and the creature, before having a objective survival, wanted to see what's going on. I feel what is saving the only good part of our civilization, if you imagine we did everything wrong, the only good part was that we just want to see what happens. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. I feel I'll end the talk here. Actually, share one story before I end off. There's this man. He's sitting in a grassland alone in this beautiful field. He closes his eyes and suddenly attains the realization that it's as if he notices the truth of the world. And the Zen story goes that there's a dark minion in another dimension that sees this, and it's like, holy shit, this guy's seeing it, you know, seeing through the illusion. And the dark minion runs to the Dark Lord and says, Dark Lord, this guy's finding out what's going on. You know, he's seeing more of the truth. What should we do? And the Dark Lord looks at the dark minion, and this is the moral of the story. The Dark Lord says, don't worry about it. He will make a belief out of it. Don't worry. Whatever he will find, he will make a belief. So this is why I'm like, it's not about kind of trying to put language on a magnifying glass, more kind of realizing why language is here as a manifest projection. And it's because we are evolving our inner technologies, and the more external reality, the more the speed of the body gets higher, the speed of the mind wants to even surpass that. And believe it or not, if the planet, where all our truths are being based on, is in the middle of, like, it's hovering in emptiness, that means even if we find truth, then we're going to be like, what do we do about emptiness though? The ultimate contentment, where the being sees there was never anything wrong. This planet is neither an educational planet or a prison planet. It's none of those. It's just a moment where the free will can sculpt. And that ability to sculpt is the opportunity of your lifetime. To realize no conscious point of attention could ever experience the unique opportunity that the conscious mind has. That means even if we find a certain truth to, let's say, Rene Descartes' mind-body dualism, and eventually we see that the mind is like a field, where particles are moving in. So what happens to the particle then? It realizes that because it confronted its fear, it saw what happened, so the desire's unknown promise no longer was kept. Honesty is a kind of like putting a key into this machine, and then the machine kind of generating clearly. Like I don't know how to tell you what it's a tension journey. That is what life is. It's this incredible view and the show of a lifetime. You see, it's the child sees a toy and can animate that toy, like it happens to like young children, that it can animate that, for example, teddy bear or something into a best friend, into something. Without honesty, the inner realities are hidden. In Zen, they say climb a mountain by starting at the top. In other words, we must, behind our eyes, see something better to be able to do better. That means regardless of the experiential accumulation and even attainment of any sort of insight, or just an awareness to what is insight, you know. Beyond language, the pilots of consciousness navigate as their whole plane of existence. You, as a momentary attention in a manifest reality, you can say this reality is solidified imagination. You can choose to see the context as the mind, or you can choose to see the context as the body. If you see the context as the body, the phenomenology of the subjective realm will be seen as hallucinations. If you see the opposite, it will be seen as reality. So what that means is, based on me feeling that my cause was material, of course, where else can matter go? It just, whatever is shaped, the shape changes, you know? The masterpiece of life at some point must return to nature. Life can only be enjoyed if the will of the eyes of the soul are authorized by the moment. A civilization and avoid contemplating what its next steps should be. You know, comedians should be held in high regard simply because the whole universe is a joke. It is a joke to the mind that can see the serious. It's when you get the taste of an experience, any experience. Let's say you're walking, and you know, a squirrel is running on the fence, and for a second that squirrel stops and stares at you and then runs again. Like an actual squirrel, for example. Imagine, just like how I am speaking, the cosmos's speech is manifestation. Now, external reality, it's being considered as the foundation. That means objective reality is the ground, and we're building the structure of our subjective considerations upon a firm objective reasoning, right? The body is here, so we're saying, all right, so body first, then mind. We never wonder if the mind is a field that the body awakens to or awakens in. So if man has an ability to not be slowed down by language, he will realize there's one thing that is faster than the speed of light for the human being, and it's the speed of attention. It is the light turning on in the room. It's when you see how in yoga they would say the yogi must attain his divine remembrance, and his divine remembrance was not his ego's journey. It wasn't Superman wondering why he's here. It was the moment, knowing how it's being before doing. There you go. I think I managed to explain that. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in, and I hope this talk was helpful. I decided to say something. I'm very fond of emails, letters, like old school letters. So anybody can email me at any time in regards to any sort of exploration of, how can I tell you? Like, we're here to see life clearly, and the only way the way we gotta attempt it, at least in an inefficient civilization, is to learn from the inefficiency, the opposite attempt. So what does that mean? That means it's like you're in a bad place. Okay, you're in a bad place. Look at that room and then acknowledge it, and then eventually the attention will center. And once the attention is recentered, then that you can navigate just comfortably. Emotions can be handled. Sometimes a person can get emotional, and if they don't just stop and pause in that moment and just take in everything that's happening, that emotion can go missed. It's as if there was something intensely occurring in the inner realms of the person, but the person ignored it because he was so focused on the outer engagement, right? So I'm saying we're a civilization of not just bodies, but minds. And because we haven't lost our minds, we have to find them in a new vision, right? And at least in 2019, this is the dawn where it's as if we no longer need soldiers of war. We need writers of story beings who can communicate their inner realms. And it's the greatest service to your species to, in some sense, bring to light something that was not seen before, I think. So what that means is it's the same tribal, playful mindset where the person finds berries and it's like, comes to the tribe, it's like, guys, there's berries here, oh my God. And if life ever by any person is meaningless, one question must be asked right after, then why is it here? Meaning arises from the here and now. Meaning arises from the now. The now is not in linear time. The now is not your memory. The now is not, like, what I mean by that is that it's like before thought inhabited your attention or became a lens for your attention. It's like without that lens, you see, it's just experiential simplicity, and the knowing arises because the being, regardless of what chaos it goes to, the hardest chaos will actually internally bring forth the most biggest inner need for order. So life is it is now in the hands of 8 billion conscious designers. That animal, that squirrel running on the fence is not a conscious designer. It is an unconscious mover. There's many creatures on this planet that are just, they're the movement of nature without any sophistication to be close to even a subjective consideration of reality. The human mind is very advanced. It's very unique. Pretty much think of it this way, that you don't know yourself and your eyes open in a world, and what can you do? Look at life as if it all could mean something totally else. Life is incredible. The unknown is the greatest gift. Because, guys, I'll be honest, I'll say it, there's been times where I've wondered, I've woken up and I've been like, oh man, life is too short. Like, I've totally understood that sentence. And there's been moments where I've been like, okay, it's too long too, you know? And then I came to the realization that who is in charge of where the meaning of one's life is being handled? And it's in nature's hand. This is why the Lao Tzu said, after the leader's task is done, the people would say, we did it ourselves. In other words, it's kind of like even the Diamond Sutra, the person is there. It's like it's the mind's effort without the body's, the body doesn't need to always be a thought, by the way. The person doesn't have to constantly be a character in a story to themselves, I find it's impossible to 24, like, not even, let's say you stayed up and like 24 hours, and it would kind of be like impossible to be an individual without a context. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, so our knowledge is, there's many dimensions to it, and some of these dimensions are like lenses that can be taken off and they can be re-put. I see life as a designer, and the task of the designer is to acknowledge design. And so we can all, as human beings, establish a civility of a world peace by just acknowledging the uniqueness of the design. Without our differences, what would people talk to each other about? So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.